My name is Rick Hiemstra. I'm the Director of Research at the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada's Centre for Research on Church and Faith. A church of 40 is not the same thing as a church of 4,000. They are both churches, but in how they work, in their community life, in their relationships with their respective communities, they're very different. A Honda Civic and a cement truck are both vehicles, but they have different purposes. My organization, the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada, was part of a study that looked at the needs of small Canadian evangelical churches, whose findings were released in the January 2023 report titled Significant Church. The Significant Church report is available as a free PDF download at www.theefc.ca/significantchurch. Few people would dig the foundation for a home with a shovel. You'd use an excavator because it would be too hard to do it by hand. Conversely, no one uses an excavator to plant perennials in their flower beds. For that, they would use a shovel or even a trowel, which is a very small shovel. This insight that the tool should be fit for the job has its analog in how we think about churches. We call this size dynamics. Size dynamics speaks to what a church of a particular size can be good at. For example, small churches are good at close family-like relationships. They can do this because it's possible to know everyone in a small church in a way that you just can't in a church of 4,000. Similarly, a large church can be good at offering demographically targeted programs because they have the staff and volunteers to pull this off. Finding places for everyone to belong and participate is another thing that small churches are good at. We know that leadership and skills development happens through doing. Small churches are most often the incubators for church leaders because small churches have an emphasis on finding a place in ministry for everyone and are generally more tolerant of people in the early stages of their skills development. The Significant Church research came about in part because there was a sense that small churches were being undervalued both by denominations and by larger congregations. Much of this devaluing of small churches came from us, and I'm thinking primarily of evangelical Christians here. They came about from us having a single vision of what a church should be, that a church should be large and getting larger. If you look at evangelicalism over the decades, you'll see that we tend to latch on to a ministry paradigm for a few decades and go all in. In the 1970s and 80s, the paradigm was church growth. And underpinning the church growth movement was an understanding that a numerically growing church was a healthy and faithful church. And the corollary was that a small church was an unhealthy, unfaithful church. And this meant that we've had decades where small churches put their energies into trying to be something else, rather than doing ministry that played to their strengths. We also learned that small church pastors need an accessible network of their peers. Jesus sent his disciples out 2 by 2. We send our small church pastors out 1 by 1. Some of this is just a reflection of the resources available in small churches, but consider again the effects of size dynamics. In large churches, there's typically a pastoral team, and if there are difficult pastoral issues that arise, you as a pastor can talk about these with the other pastoral staff, getting advice and help in carrying the burden of ministry. In smaller churches, confidentiality requirements, and in many rural cases, distance, means that those kinds of help and connections aren't as available. A network is a way to access resources. And in the case of small church pastors, we realized that a network of other pastors with their wisdom and experience was one of the most valuable networks that a small church pastor could access. Pastoral ministry is just too varied, too complex, too nuanced for a denomination or another ministry organization to anticipate all that a pastor might need and to prepare resources for them ahead of time. This is why the wisdom of a network of peers is so valuable, and why one of the best ways a denomination could resource small church pastors is to facilitate access to an accessible network of their peers. Now, I've emphasized accessibility several times in describing these networks, and that's because a network design influences how accessible its resources are. A familiar analogy would be the internet. The internet has a lot of resources, but without Google to tell you how to access those resources, it would be next to useless. Our report talks about many factors that create what we call network distance, which should help leaders design ministry networks that minimize those distances. Understanding size dynamics helps us understand the different ways congregations of all sizes work, and more importantly, understanding size dynamics helps us understand how small churches can play to their strengths. It helps churches of other sizes understand why a denomination or a movement might want churches of various sizes depending on what the ministry context requires. What does your church's size make it particularly good at? How could you lean into those strengths for the glory of God? And what features or qualities would you need to build into a network of your peers so that it was truly accessible and useful for you in your day-to-day ministry?